Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to not having bombs raining down from the sky.
0 bombs currently being rained down on our civilian locale.
Chico, California. Protected under the warm, feathery mother hen of mutually assured destruction. It's been sitting on us for 60 years, protecting us from Russian missiles.
Yeah, and lulling us into a false sense of everyone wanting this peace and thinking this peace is even achievable. Maybe that's part of it.
I was wrong. Last week, my take on the Ukraine situation was that it was a bluff and that it wasn't really I thought that Putin was going to maybe annex a couple of those eastern regions where they had, separatist stuff going on ever since 2014. I thought it was going to be like Crimea, but boy, was I wrong. My intuition was off. Apparently, Russia has bombed cities all over the country. And
from all angles.
It's fucking crazy. It's the biggest shit to go down in Europe since 1945.
So I guess there's maybe something to be gained in Putin's mind from big dick energy. Like he gets to be that guy who breaks the glass at the dinner table.
I heard a take on this that was saying that this is not foreign politics for Putin, it's domestic politics. That because historically, ever since Putin's been, the autocrat of Russia for like about 20 years now, and he has ever since Yeltsin, and every time his popularity has gone down, he's started a kind of war of territory. Georgia, Crimea, and now Ukraine. And because something about this person I was reading on Twitter thinks that it seemed a little bit reductive to me, but it was like basically the main takeaway was that Russian people appreciate a victorious military leader, and so maybe that's a disconnect between American politics and Russian politics, is that it's Russian politics is just like, well, we're not judging this guy on some kind of how good of a person he is. We're judging him on how successful he can win wars, how successful he can be in war, which is fucking crazy. And it just shows you how maybe over-applying the American lens of looking at things is, because all of our wars, like Iraq was dressed up and was billed as this humanitarian mission to save the people. And like when people caught on to the idea that it wasn't that, the whole thing fell apart and Bush's popularity went way down. But maybe it isn't the case with Putin, is people want to see results and they're like, oh, we got territory? Great. I don't really know though, because all the Russians I've ever known have been just like you and I.
Same.
And they've been like, because I knew a few of them when I was living in Finland, and I just can't imagine. Maybe there's like a whole population of like backwoods Russians or something that feels differently, or like whose mind was influenced by the Soviet Union. But from what I understand, there's a bunch of. I don't think Russian society is a monolith in that regard, because there's a lot of protests in cities across Russia about this. I don't think that the Russians are particularly happy with having their economy scuttled for some gains of territory. So I don't know what Putin's deal is. Maybe he's been diagnosed with like prostate cancer or something, and it's got like 2 years, and it's like,
that would do it.
Make the Soviet Union great again. I could see that happening. I think about that a lot. Like, what happens if one of these nuclear button dudes just has a midlife crisis?
There's the inevitability of becoming more and more closely aligned with China.
Yeah.
Because of U.S. Helping Ukraine. So there could have been a deal made with China that once Putin locked in what China's specifically going to do for him, then he feels comfortable with setting up this huge conflict against the USA. It all is very grotesque and short-sighted and doesn't play to anyone's benefit in my mind except the worst parties. And it, to my mind, it's a further argument for Michael Malice's anarchism and his pacifism, which is largely probably my pacifism too. People don't want to go to war. It's governments that go to war to steal the commerce of countries that they can't make for themselves. It's just gross. And I'm not saying Putin is unique in that. I'm saying governments are fucking gross.
Yeah.
And wars wouldn't happen with sufficiently limited governments. Like if free market is running the show, big business doesn't want to create war. Because that destroys markets. Markets can't exist in piles of rubble. There's
certain kinds of markets can.
Yes, there's the weapon companies.
Right. Parasitic enterprises that ultimately couldn't exist without the destruction wrought by centralized powers.
Well, there's those. That's the biggest critique against laissez-faire capitalism is these big corrupt businesses who have merged business and state.
Yeah.
To get an unfair advantage over other people. So that's not laissez-faire capitalism. That's crony capitalism, which is what communism is as well.
Well, it's the merger, depending on what side of the, depending on what sort of ideological stripes you have, you're going to call that merger of state and corporate power capitalism or communism or fascism, depending on where you're coming from and what you think is the purported solution to that. Like if you think that the Soviet Union was communist, then you're going to point to that and you're going to call that merger of state and corporate power communism. But it's really, and I think at the end, China's the same thing. China is the merger of state and corporate power, except it just kind of happened from the other direction. That China already had a very strong cultural inclination towards centralized bureaucracy because of Confucianism, and so they allowed a market to develop and then sort of monopolized it every step of the way, and that's how China's even been able to compete at all in the world. Whereas Russia is this interesting, almost like an amalgamation of oligarchic interests that is kept together by a strongman. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, oligarchs pretty much ran the country, and Putin is the one who keeps them all in line. And so it's this interesting progression from this kind of crony capitalist market that spawned this this centralized political power. And it's so I don't know, it's almost like it makes sense why Russia and China formed this kind of axis, because they're both going hard on this merger of state and corporate power. They're both very unable to export their soft power, and so they resort to hard power.
Yeah,
I think that's what's going on at a high level.
That's the common denominator of fascism out of that merge, or communism out of that merge. The common denominator is thinking you can use force to get things done. And when you're using force, you can't think freely. and you're forced to steal ideas and value and products from the free nations or the populations within your country that are allowed to think freely. Well, what do we have to say about it?
What I've been tripping out about is, so up until about 3 days ago, there was a lot of people that, myself included, that thought this was kind of a bluff, or that it would be kind of a limited annexation type thing. But apparently that's not the case. So obviously, let's imagine like your average 20-something kid in the Russian army, who's been sent to the Ukraine border and probably thinks, this is some kind of military exercise thing. Okay, I'm just in the army now. I'm gonna go do this thing, and you're a guy who probably plays video games and you're like a 20-something guy living in Russia, right? You're not like an orc. You're like a human, You probably have like a girlfriend and a mom, So like you're in the army though, and so you get sent to the border, and then next thing you know, oh, you're gonna go kill these people. That's a surprise to you, I don't, because you can't obviously tell, hundreds of thousands of people who are like on the boots on the ground troops, oh, this is actually the plan, and then they're all mentally prepared for it. They're just as surprised. Like you have to, it's a state level secret. It has to be. That was Putin's whole ploy, is that this was unexpected. So I wonder how many of these people are like, that's why I think the Ukrainians have much more of a chance than people might think, is because
they have something to fight for.
Yeah, they have something to fight for.
And the Russian people are just following orders.
And they're trying, and I think like at some point, this is like, because Russia is not like China in the sense that the internet isn't really, like it is obviously monitored in Russia, but it isn't fully blocked. So like Russia, you can access BBC.com in Russia. You can access foreign websites. You can access TikTok and Instagram and Signal and WhatsApp. You can do all these things. And so obviously there's videos of like, people your age on their iPhones hiding in a subway while bombs are coming down. That is not something that you can explain as, like some terrorist or something to the average 20-something-year-old member of the Russian army. So I think that there's probably a lot of, just judging by the protests in Russia and judging, I really think that that Putin either knows something that I don't, or I'm sure he does, but maybe he has a wrong take on this. Maybe he overestimates. Maybe he's still living in the past because he's almost 70. Maybe he doesn't understand what a modern war that's being live streamed, and like,
that's my immediate first impression is, who is this fucking dinosaur?
Yeah.
Who's lived his life as a bureaucrat, who's willing to murder and use force, and so he thinks that's the way the world works.
It's gonna tell this generation of people that's 50 years younger than him, you go kill each other. Yeah, because of some geopolitical interest that you're just, like, what is the average guy in Russia doing? My impression of the average Russian dude is he's just like vaping, like kind of nihilistic, but like
wearing a tracksuit.
Doesn't really
on chicks.
Doesn't really want to kill anyone. It's just like, trying to like make it in like the gritty sort of like Russian, modern Russia.
Yeah, he's got his new T-shirt hustle.
Probably likes hip hop, like he's not a fucking murderer. He's not a dead-eyed murderer. He's just like a little. He's like he'd be like he's like the kind of guy you'd like run into at a party and be like, bro,
My present conviction is most people aren't murderers, and it requires mostly lies and indoctrination to convince someone of any time in history to go kill someone else, unless it's like invaders on your home soil.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this. Yeah, and if you think about the Iraq War, even in the Iraq War, the only thing you saw on TV was
sorry. This is something I do.
Yeah.
And I do the sorry thing.
No, it's okay.
That is dumb to like.
No, it's all good.
I do that thing I say is dumb where I say sorry not because I'm actually correcting a moral error, but because I just want to get to where I'm talking faster.
Sure. No, I've been on a big spiel here, so jump in, man.
I have an anecdote of a guy in the army in Iraq, and he killed a few people, and he's my friend. And he described one confrontation that ended in him killing someone where the guy was fucking methed up on something. Like, he was like stumbling across the dead zone towards my friend as my friend was yelling at him to stand down or he's gonna die. And
this was in Iraq?
Mm-hmm. And this guy was just like, he had like a stupid grin on his face and was stumbling and high and probably had a gun. Like, it was implied in the story that he was a combatant. So probably a visible gun on him, and just took him down because described doing everything possible to not have to kill that dude.
God, that's so fucked up.
And what was it that short-circuited that other dude's ability to respond? Like, he had to be fucking crazed out on drugs. Like, even whatever presumably indoctrinated, like, religious thing that the narrative was that these are all, like, jihadists.
Yeah.
Who are on a mission from God to kill Americans.
Because they hate us for our freedom, blah, 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 yeah.
If that narrative was true, right, then even that wasn't enough. This guy had to also be on speed to, like, fight, and it's just so grotesque and pointless, and people, killing other people is against human nature, and it just requires a lot of distortion and allowing governments to have power that they shouldn't have, that puts us in those situations.
Yeah, my feeling on this was like, I was just thinking like, wow, what is this mind control that we're all under? That if you look at a map, you just see the countries of the world, you see the outlines, the lines that are all in, between them, and you just have, there's like a flag in each one, and like, these are almost like just mental reality bubbles that are not consistent with each other, and when they bump into each other, the way that they reconcile is just by people killing each other. And it's like we're so far away from, we're still so deeply unconscious, and we're still so deeply in the ancient history of the human race, and we're so far from that point of consciousness where the idea that like, I think like in the future, if humans survive as a species, we're going to look back on this time and be like, this was a time in which, like, it's going to seem inconceivable that a whole city's worth of people could be just in the way of bombs because some reason that no one really even knows. It's just something like, you look at the media and like you just try to find like, okay, so the only thing anyone can say is like, we're sitting here trying to figure out, okay, so some geopolitical something, who knows? It's just because some guy in some office somewhere said something and signed some document, and then the orders go, and now this is happening. And they're fueling up the jets, and they're taking off, and they're pushing the button. Like, how there's a total removal of people's autonomy at every single point along the way. There's
a sense in that story of yours about the need for psychedelics, because then the individual automaton fueling up a tank comes awake to himself and realizes he's a human being, not an NPC.
And realizes like, gee, I just kind of popped into this world few years ago, and it's kind of an assumption, I guess, that this is what's important for me at this moment. Like that you've almost like you maybe might remember suddenly that you at some point made an assumption that you had to do this and had to subscribe to this reality, but you forgot that you made that assumption and you're just sleepwalking in day to day to day going, this is what I'm doing, I guess.
Well, most of your processes are sleepwalking. Just as the brain filtering mechanism to like have any amount of free will, it requires filtering out most things. Like anything that can be logged into an automatic behavior thing by assumption, you're going to do that.
Yeah. Like
the maximum amount of things that can be offloaded onto habits, your brain does. So that extends to someone like Putin as well. I think it's pretty cool, the idea to have Lex Fridman interview Putin at this moment.
I think so too. I know I saw Lex Fridman tweet about that.
Yes, that'd be the most fucking based move of America.
Well, I feel like, Lex Fridman, after this happened, I was like really curious to see what, I was like, man, I'm going to look at his Twitter because he's Russian and he has this kind of really universalist way of looking at things. And sure enough, I wasn't disappointed. He was going to drop that podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, but he decided to delay it, which felt right. He's, I guess, going to go travel to Ukraine and Russia and try to interview people. I saw some people were giving him criticism of that idea, like you shouldn't talk to Putin, but he kind of but he was sticking to his guns, and I was like, no, you know what? You need to talk to Putin. You can't. The whole reason we're doing this violence thing is because we're not talking.
Exactly.
And I don't know how much clearer. I don't know how to make that any clearer. It's almost like in a more general level, this mind control thing where there's like different countries have different media environments that create different realities that are inconsistent, that require violence when they touch, and the borders are like the physical manifestation of those different like realities people are living in. It's like I feel like the only cure for the only solution, the only way out of this impasse of having different nations that are like limiting the ability of people to form a common narrative with the people they're supposed to go kill is to just build a higher level nation, a space like the internet. This is what I think Web3 is really going to. I think like Web3 could be one of the best tools to, just like basically by making a place where people can form common narratives. Because if everyone in the world had a narrative that they could subscribe to, it'd be a lot harder to start wars. You don't see Massachusetts invading Vermont, even though there might be some resources there they could want, and if they all ganged up on them, they could probably take them. You don't, because you have to dehumanize another person to, like, I think what Putin actually said was that his justification, the way he's trying, the way he's billing this operation is he's going into, it's a military operation to denazify
That's
Ukraine.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, gee, who does that sound like?
Yeah.
It was about a week ago that Justin Trudeau stood up in front of Canadians and said,
and called his Canadian working class Nazis.
So
justified.
It's like, so congratulations, Trudeau.
Taking their money.
You're in a real exclusive, real special club of the dictators who called their own, who are using the Nazi card on millions of people
to justify tyranny.
To justify
straight up tyranny.
Violence. Yeah, in the last month. So congratulations. That's crazy. If that doesn't show you like what kind of like this is a narrative war. It's really becoming weirdly literary. You know what I'm saying? Like it's becoming abstracted away from almost like the material world.
Okay, so there's a critical mass of events that you get to where you're forced to abstract it into art, into the literary, into the larger than life, like comic book heroes thing. Like current events can only get so crazy before your sense-making apparatus retreats into the literary,
Right.
or into just being a zombie ideologue, of course. But like to attack it in a sense-making sense and keep proactively unpacking it, you do have to start thinking in fantastic terms and symbols and archetypes and stuff.
It seems like that's the only lens that this is tractable, that this makes this tractable for me, is I don't think this is that you can explain what's going on in the world in terms of like just trying to get resources anymore. I think,
and this is, as most things are, is a further application of my own convictions from before. I think this is just more of the same of the kind of shit that's always been happening, but plus cell phones. And plus visibility and transparency.
Right.
Like, the USA has been killing thousands and thousands of people and helping Saudi Arabia kill thousands and thousands of people for fucking decades. And Russia's doing the same. China's doing the same. China invaded Hong Kong and took it over, and no one did shit. So how is Ukraine really any different? Like a slight gradational increase in scale, but it's just more of the same, except we're primed as a one world nation. We're now primed by Trump and by COVID to look at things together. And that is a very limiting lens, because we have an instinct to now, as a world nation connected by the internet, to all look at things together at the same time as they're happening in real time. A lot of events just like get left on the wayside because they don't play into the very constricted narrative that we can all agree is what's happening. But Ukraine is happening in a time of peak readiness for the next cataclysm for us all to look at together. It's not that it's unique, is my conclusion, which is a further application of the way I already thought before. It's not that this is a unique event, it's that we have a unique ability to internationally perceive events together. And it makes it seem bigger than it is. Because we don't think of big world events as separate from us anymore.
You know what it's like? It's like in the past, World Wars was like everyone being in a drunken stupor in a bar and two big beefy dudes beating the shit out of each other in in a dark corner, and everyone just, not knowing what the fuck to do about that. And but it's just like you're so sort of like inured to the violence of life because you've been living in this state of unconsciousness for so long that it just seems like, well, yeah, violence is the way of the world. Like, There isn't this rawness of feeling that comes, you read in the newspapers, you're like, 50,000 people died in France because of this carpet bombing. You're like, oh, that's so tragic. But it almost seems like biblical or something. You think of it as like some kind of like, oh, it must be the end times. It must, it's like there's like this mythological nature to that. But like with Ukraine, you see people, like a video of somebody like, just like, who looks like you and has like dresses like you, and they've just got like blood all over them because of like a bomb that went off in their neighborhood. And that's it would be like if you took, it's like, because of the way technology has affected people, we've talked about this before, but how the internet itself is kind of like a psychedelic, where it's increasing the overall consciousness, and it's opening the kind of doors, opening the floodgates to just having just so much more raw information streaming at us, and having so much more weird, crazy shit that it's like this war going on. This live streamed war is like people getting into a fist fight when they're on mushrooms or something. It's just more grotesque. It's like you feel the emotional pain of it more because it's so much more visceral, and you can see like in HD, like the micro expression on the girl's face as she's saying goodbye to her boyfriend at the train station, and he's supposed to like fight the Russians, and she's gonna go to like Poland and try to hope he doesn't die, and they're probably like texting the whole time like, what's going on, isn't that crazy? Or like, I was thinking, looking at these pictures of people like laying in the subway. There was a side-by-side photo that showed like, London 1945 and Kiev 2022. It's like the same photo, just people like in sleeping bags, like on the subway platform, just like waiting, hoping the bombs stop. And I'm looking at the people in the modern photo, they're like all on their phones, probably looking at the news or something. And I'm thinking like, some of those people are probably just like playing games because they're just fucking trying to distract themselves. And it's so empathetic to have those like weird things that seem like fake and modern and silly be like embedded in this historical, kind of like historical event. And it gives me honestly more empathy towards people in the past also. Because I think like, wow, World War II happened in HD color also.
Yes.
It wasn't this black and white thing that people just kind of saw through the squinty eyes of...
It was the future happening to them.
It was. It felt so futuristic and unprecedented and weird at the time. Yeah, and that's what this feels like to us, but also I feel like in some sense, I had this weird feeling because of thinking about how unconscious and how sleepwalking everyone is, politically we're like sleepwalking. It's like, I had this feeling that we're living in ancient history now, that this is history.
You're seeing this from the point of view of the far future.
From the far future, and I'm looking at us going like, this is some weird, hybrid, animalistic shit that's going on with this just grotesque, like millions of people on a highway fleeing west because of some mysterious pronouncement from some guy based on some historical thing that still has all this power to influence and completely upend millions of people's lives. Like that, having the world be in that way is so far from equilibrium. It's so far from a state of kind of like settledness to where if people... Like there's so many latent positive feedback systems that have not yet been unlocked. I guess that's my point. Is that like there's all these potential cataclysms that just need a trigger. Whereas if the world had the unified narrative and you had the ability to try to pursue every thread of the narrative and be like, are these people bad guys? Are these people bad guys? Are these people bad guys? Okay, here's why not. And you have all this conflict that plays out, but there's like a shared history that helps you remember, okay, no, these are not people we're going to kill. The world would eventually get to a point where it could remember its past enough in a cultural memory to not kill each other. Like the reason why Massachusetts and Vermont don't kill each other. They have this shared lineage. But like Ukraine and Russia have had this they're still dealing with the karma of World War II, of the Cold War, of the fall of the Soviet Union. And so that is this, it's like this potential energy that's locked in the psyche in the collective unconscious that when it becomes unleashed by somebody like Putin, who has nothing to lose because he's deadened his own human empathy to the point that he thinks it's appropriate to do something like this, everyone gets caught up in the torrent. And it's like you open the dam and everyone gets swept. And like physically, that current physically moves people. It moves millions of people to a different country. So these ideas have like a physical power that I think has to be understood as part of the human system. And we have to look at ways of how to neutralize these stores of energy in a way that's at the very least, not destructive, but hopefully constructive. Like how the idea you had a couple weeks ago about how, like, the point about how Japan's sense of national superiority was redirected towards capitalism instead of
war,
instead of nationalism. Yeah, instead of militarism. So that's my rant on the whole thing. It all comes back to the internet. I think that's like the only thing that can save us at this point.
Yeah, and for me, it all comes back to individuality and the sanctity of the individual, as things do at this show.
Yeah. Well, the two are not. They're not opposed.
Yeah, they're the same idea. The Web3 is the actualizing of a more rigorous principle of individual rights.
Yeah, it's basically taking individuals and wrapping them in computer code instead of taking ideologies and wrapping them in computer code.
My brain is baked. I'm gonna take a
All right.
I'm gonna take a breather. Yeah. My primary sense of it at the moment is how it's going to affect me, and probably cut into my very, very constricted budget.
Because gas is going to become quite expensive.
And we are being run by a Biden administration, yes. Those two things put together. That is fighting its own war against Web3, basically. So the big impression, the big reaction, or the reaction at the moment I'm having to the Ukraine crisis is of, like, checking my own, like, ship in the sea and going, okay, like, logically / intuitively, like, both of them put together, like, am I prepared for the next wave of whatever's happening next? Based on how COVID went, yes, I can handle what comes next, with this conviction that I have that the present moment, properly attended to, prepares you for the next coming moment, even though the next moment is completely unknown and is holds completely unprecedented good things and bad things coming down the line towards you. If you are awake and responding and adapting to the present and being proactive with putting your input into it, then you'll be prepared for whatever happens next. And as depressed as I am these days, COVID showed me in more objective terms than I know how to include in my equations, that I'm one of the most stable, maybe one of the most stable human beings that's, like, existed evolutionary so far. I'm certainly stable enough to have responded, like, a whole, like, gradation, what's the word? A whole, like, magnitude more better to COVID than the average person. COVID made me grow and made me more grounded and made me healthier and made me happier. So I can reason that probably the next thing coming down the pipe I'll be able to deal with, because the last thing that happened showed up my stability so objectively.
It sounds like you're speaking to the idea of anti-fragility.
Sure, but I hate that phrase.
You hate it because it's, like, been a word that has been, like, tainted by association with all the discourse around white fragility or whatever the heck that is.
No, I think it's semantically in error.
Oh, that's not the objection I anticipated. How so? Well, maybe you say what I think about anti-fragility is a property of systems that they become stronger in response to disturbances. or they gain ground, basically.
I understand that present connotation of that phrase, but it's semantically in error to achieving that effect, because all you're seeing in the meaning of that phrase is fragility. That's the positive actor in that chemical equation of meaning, is fragility.
So how would you describe that?
Well, to use other cliched SJW colonized terms, resiliency is a much better term.
I guess I don't think either of those words have been colonized. You know what? Yeah, words, man, symbols, whatever. I guess the words are bullshit. The mental image, I wish I could just download a mental image to people. I have this idea of like, okay, you know what is anti-fragile? Is a mycelial network, because when you kick shit around, it doesn't care, because it's like, thanks, you just opened up new surfaces for me to grow into.
Right.
Like, it's something like, I think that's what's going on. You have in the world, you have these powerful, rusting...
So then I would, if I was forced to use a word like anti-fragile, I would use healthy, I would use grassroots, I would use sustainable, I would use mycelial.
Mycelial, that's a cool adjective.
I would use decentralized.
I think if the word mycelial becomes inducted into the popular lexicon, it will be immediately, it'll be cliched by a certain crowd of people in a matter of weeks, I think. That seems like one of those words like that is like so applicable to anything that you want to describe as good, that you could just be like, I mean, especially like given my bias where like I've basically substituted the centralized decentralized axis for my good bad axis in my personal metaphysics.
Yeah.
I could see myself adopting mycelial as just like a calling card for the whole, what is holy in the world, and be like, well, that's so mycelial, man. Mycelial.
That's language for you.
Yeah. It really, I mean, I'm aware of this substitution that I've made.
One of Ayn Rand's writing tips for herself, like reading her journals, her critique on herself, is trying to remind herself that every time I describe a given trait about a character, I have to describe it in a new way. And then she doesn't even follow that in Atlas Shrugged. She only really does that in The Fountainhead, which I think is a superior work of creativity. But it's a really good injunction. As many times as you're going to describe something, if you're writing a book of it, you got to describe it in a new way every time you return to it.
That's a pretty useful way of doing things, I suppose.
And in terms of language or conversation, like, that's a bit too tall of an order, but at least when you find yourself using that stereotype or idea or something too much, then there should be like a warning bell in you that says you need to evolve that concept a little further.
Yeah.
At least so you don't get tired of hearing yourself talk.
I'm at no risk of that.
I am. But I'm tired. I'm just existentially tired of everything. So I take my exhaustion at hearing myself talk, I just take that with a grain of salt.
Well, maybe you'll existentially wake up soon. Maybe it's just your existential darkness before the dawn.
And I have the Mandarin as a safety net there. I have a way to generate new language scheduled this Monday.
Yeah, I've been reading the Mandarin. It's a really beautiful website. I like the web design. It's great.
Good.
It's funny how that's the first thing I take away from it.
I mean, you have Jade to thank for that, but you also just have Squarespace to thank for that.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess I've never used Squarespace, but it's yeah.
The Mandarin's good. It's well, I just think language is our Gandalf, like Gandalf the Grey, like our language, and the written language is our access to magic, our direct access to changing the underlying OS that creates our perception of reality.
In that case, if that's
First by articulating your perception, simply just journalistically saying what your experience is so it's in front of you. Second, by using fiction to say what it could be instead.
So here's a question. Do you think that, do you think computer code is, would you say that's fiction or nonfiction?
That's nonfiction. It requires fiction to be vital and useful. Just like the world requires art to be vital and healthy.
Yeah. So the defining quality of
just
fiction,
like the human spirit needs an ideal that hasn't been reached yet to strive towards to be healthy.
would you say the defining quality of fiction is imagination or fantasy or personality or what? Because what would you say that what would you say the distinction between fiction and nonfiction is? And the reason I ask you this is because I want to try to think about computer code based on what you say.
Saying the crucial difference there is deciding that what should exist, the ideal of the world, is more important as a motivating factor than accepting what is around you at the moment.
So nonfiction is writing about reality as it is. Fiction is writing about reality as it could be.
And it requires the same necessary ingredient of imagination to write good nonfiction, because that postmodern principle does have accuracy where information only comes through your own biases.
Yeah.
And your own goals and your own aims.
Right.
And you can be unconscious about that and write lesser nonfiction, or you can be conscious about your ability to decide what history is.
Yes.
And history is such a static TV screen of so much information that it's nonsense, that it requires imagination to choose a uniting narrative, to filter which pieces of history you're going to write about, in what kind of order you're going to write about, to prove a point that's, that's like inductive reasoning, I guess. So like people try to get away from that to get more to objective truth. But I think like objective truth can't be reached without reckoning with your brain's need to create the truth, to perceive it.
Well, to me, what that points to is that ethos is a necessary part of fiction. That fiction isn't fiction without an element of ethos. And I guess the simplest way to see why that's true is to think about a person who writes a book about the future, predicting what the future will be. If somebody writes a book of 10 predictions for the next 10 years, they are not necessarily endorsing those predictions. They're just saying, this is what I think is going to happen, and here's my imagination of the future. This is a work of nonfiction. It's just my ideas. It's my predictions, right? It's like what people who are trying to convince you that they know something about how to invest money are selling you. They're selling you a book of predictions. But on the other hand, there's books that talk about the future that are like not about what will be, but about what could be. And there's like this element of ethos that is saying like, this is one possible path in the multiverse. I'm not making the case for the fact that this is going to happen. I'm making the case for why this should happen, if only in a sense that you might consider it real enough, like consider the characters real enough that they have power in the world. Like when you read a book and you get inspired by someone else's imagination of a fictitious person who then becomes somewhat of a real person in your life. So like that imagination is instantiating itself into the world, and it can't instantiate itself into people, and it can't incentivize people to want to adopt those characters into their life unless those characters paint an alluring picture of what life could be.
Yeah.
And so like you can't have like, you know, maybe you might have fiction that's like dark and depressing and nihilistic, but that maybe has a place if, you know, as a cautionary tale or something, but if it's not embedded in a larger narrative of positivity, then it's not, I don't think it really is the same thing. It won't last in the world. Like the fiction that's lasted that we still talk about is something that is affirming, because it wouldn't be here. It wouldn't have persisted in the ecology of human culture if it couldn't keep getting into people's minds.
Yeah, and so there's a way in which fiction depends on hitting on something true to the human spirit, to be vital, and that is a way in which good fiction becomes a new non-fiction of, well, now we have more objective information about Jungian archetypes in humanity, and so now we have a better understanding of just what is, in terms of like what are the gods that rule man from within that were previously unconscious until we used fiction to accidentally discover these things that were just hidden, which then makes for more accurate interpretations of present history, and gives you a higher plateau from which to dream up new works of fiction. And I'm still creatively myself, I'm at an impasse where I don't know what I want to say at the moment, and I'm still just completely maxed out and finding out if my patterns to date were like built well enough to just like carry me through to the next wave of inspiration or not. And so like everything's like growing to like the new like set of garden beds that I built. Like everything's like just inevitably growing in a generative and healthy way. But the day-to-day, like, what's the artistic statement that's going to motivate what I fucking do today? I'm just very like, I don't know, I just need a fucking nap.
I think you need some chaos energy. Like maybe you should go just walk around in the forest naked for like a week or something. You know what I mean? Do like some kind of fucking vision quest kind of shit. Like that kind of, you know, or like just I feel like that is
I have a very clear intuitional like guardrail that is responding to that idea with no.
Really?
Just breathe and wait it out and let the things you've planted grow for a while. Resist the temptation to like break out of something. Maybe because that is coming from that would then be me coming down on the side of what I've built patterned wise doesn't work. And it does work. I'm just really fucking uncomfortable right now.
Yeah, the patterns, I mean, definitely, like, even compared to like a year ago, your output is like crazy. Your discipline of doing this kind of artistic production is it's very. I can see. I mean, I think you just work a lot harder than most people, and don't have this kind of downtime to just fuck around that most people take for granted in their life.
I've too effectively created nets of creative production around every single thing that I like to do.
You know what it's almost like? It's like, I can compare this, it's like you're a rainforest ecosystem that's close to equilibrium, which is a kind of stagnancy that occurs when niches have been efficiently maximized and every bit of potential energy that's passing through the system has been efficiently turned into a more complex structure. And it's like, and usually what happens, at least in Earth, sooner or later an asteroid hits, and then the DNA from that ecosystem gets to break into a bunch of new niches, and then it blows up.
Sure.
So
I'm remembering yesterday when I was singing last night, and I like pulse in and out of work when I'm in my workflow. I like do something like physical, then do something with the guitar, then do something with the voice, then just like scroll my YouTube feed, and then like just do that in a circle. And so my YouTube feed brought me into checking out old press documentaries of my teenage favorite band, Coal Chamber, and watching some interviews with the singer Des Fefera, and he was describing his tour grind.
Yeah.
And how, well, he watched his first band fall apart because everyone is hooked on hard drugs. And so his new band and his new life is much more about yoga and routine and sticking to routine.
So it goes.
and the proof is in the pudding in terms of how hard he's able to tour.
Yeah.
And he has a family and has a wife. And he prefers when his tour locks into a Groundhog Day rhythm. He prefers that. But then the proof is also in the pudding of something being crucially missing from his equation, because his music just isn't very good. And his best music was in the explosive chaos of the first band.
Yeah.
Like, as it was being torn apart by hard drugs, they were accidentally in an axis of influence and culture and passion for what they were doing and romanticism about what they could achieve, that they made what I think is his best work.
Yeah.
And the routine that's locked in for him personally, that's like getting him a paycheck, has come at the cost of actual novelty. So there's a balance there. Now I'm just completely off in Alex Lightland, but I remember being on LSD out in my magic spot. Yeah, I'm pointing at it right now.
What's the magic spot?
It's a place that no one knows about except me.
All right, let's keep it that way.
That requires an hour's hike down North Rim.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so hard to pinpoint. I literally get lost on my way there.
But you're just like, intuition guides you?
Well, I know the right cues of when to go off the trail.
Yeah.
And then I always get lost after that and then end up at my spot.
Nice.
So I went out to that spot to trip on LSD by myself, and I was eating an apple at one point, and I saw Dez's face inside the apple.
Did you keep eating it?
Of course. And his face became like a warrior shaman eagle being. And And he has a very striking face because he's given himself a lot of facial tattoos that accent his weird fucking face. And that was a cool moment. And I've looked to the ideal of him often and what I'm trying to do as a heavy metal vocalist, of using aggression and using savage art and negativity itself to make a savagely positive vehicle of expression and creativity. Like, his best album was written while he was falling in love with his wife, and the best songs on it are just about life and love and how to create your reality.
You think that he, do you think that there's like an order that has to occur to where like a band is in this savage, chaotic, crisis, explosion of creativity mode, and they can kind of use that as like the basis upon which their later routine gets premised? Like, or do you think it's possible that like you can be in this mode and then find like you can build the structure that almost is like ready for the seed of inspiration to land in? Like, I guess, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, a lot of our Ade and mine's stuff, a lot of the better pieces have that feeling of discovery and revelation.
Yeah.
But the success with which we've been able to translate that revelation into an actual song that you can actually hear was completely dependent on the structures of conscientiousness that we'd developed up to that point.
Yeah. They really need each other, these structures of conscientiousness and inspiration, and it's like the integration of those two structures is how you get like Elon Musk shit.
Well, they shunt you in overbalance from one to the other, but that's how plants grow, in my opinion.
Oh, really?
I think things grow by imbalance, and I don't think balance is real. I don't think you achieve a healthy balance by holding healthy balance as your ideal.
Exactly, no. You have to have a metastable equilibrium.
You achieve the metastable equilibrium not by holding that as your ideal, but by following the muse until you have to get overcorrected away from it. I think correcting imbalances is the way you achieve a meta balance.
You jump and then trust that you'll figure out how to swim.
Ultimate balance there's a name for it. It's called death. It's called stagnancy. It's called you're not moving anymore.
That's the simplest kind of balance. It's the balance that doesn't have to justify itself because there's nothing to point at. It's ultimately, I mean, I've thought about this even from a geometric perspective. Like, the most perfectly symmetrical object is pure chaos. And you can think of this as a thought experiment, you know what I mean? You can look at you could look at a square and you can be like, how many lines of symmetry does a square have? Well, it has 4. See, I'm already fucking this up. 4, right? There's 4 ways you can fold it. You can fold it in half, you can fold it the other way, you can fold it diagonally, or you can fold it the other way diagonally. And then you can ask that same question about a cube, and I don't know, maybe like 8 or 16. I can't fucking do this math in my head right now. But the point is, you can create all these more complex objects, and you can draw more and more and more lines of symmetry, and then you can start adding other dimensions. Like, you can talk about like color, you can talk about weight, you can talk about how beautiful something is. It doesn't matter how objective it is. You can add more and more and more ways of looking at something that is going to make the picture more and more complicated. But ultimately, if you imagine a region of space where there is pure chaos. It's just heat death. It's just a bunch of atoms flying around randomly. There's basically, you reach a state where there's absolutely no region of this space that is in principle different than any other region. Suddenly you can't say anything else about it. There's nothing to say about it. The amount you can say about that kind of purely chaotic situation is precisely the same amount of something that you can say about nothing. Because you can't even say that it exists anymore, because there's nothing distinguishing it from something that doesn't. And that's like the ultimate limit of the heat death thingy that reaches around and touches the tail of the Ouroboros, of like the thing that kind of proves, I guess the whole point of this little outlay of talking about stuff was to kind of like prove that reality itself exists in the sort of space in between those 2 points, on sort of like the arc that is the infinite collapsed by something into a finite reality. That is kind of a compromise, a temporary compromise between the everything and the nothing state, to where something can actually be said. And, maybe the creative process, something like that, is like, who the fuck knows where it comes from? But the process of making something is like happening on the way to getting somewhere. It's happening, like you have to have, I guess, just a reason to give a fuck. And that's like the ultimate power source. A feeling that you should care, a feeling that it matters, like a feeling that you'll go crazy if you don't have something to work on is good enough for me. Mm-hmm. That's what it's been for me. I can't explain why I want to work to work on Web3. I just know that if I wasn't, I'd be very unhappy.
Sure.
And so I'm being chased by a bear. Okay, well, that's pretty good motivation to run.
Sure.
It's the one I have. I'm not even making an argument that that's the best one. I'm just saying that's the one that is. Objectively, non-fictionally, the narrative of my life is that I'm really bored and unhappy if I'm not creating stuff.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's great if I can just accept that as a basic premise and then go, okay, I'm not even going to think or argue or try to worry about that anymore. What am I going to do with, like, okay, so if I'm just accepted that I'm this kind of person. Obviously, you're this kind of person, too. You're being chased by some kind of existential void monster. And, it's that gives you a lot of momentum, though, to try to funnel into different things. It's a high-energy form of fucking around. It's the kind of fucking around that is not going to be satisfied by, like, watching Marvel movies and stuff. Maybe I'm just saying that because I never read comic books. Maybe it's not fair, but I just think that, there's a kind of like beauty in just accepting your own like peculiarities, and realizing that, like, energy is energy. Why is it that somebody who maybe some people require hard drugs to push them into a crazy fucking state where they do something, Like if I grew up in, I don't know, some sort of like weird suburban environment or something, yeah, I'd probably have to do drugs to like get myself kicked into the state of caring. But like my childhood was filled with its own kind of drug, which was like conservative religious bullshit.
Yeah.
And that kicked me so fucking far out of mainstream culture that I had the process of trying to figure out what the hell the world is, coming from that weird place that I got kind of like booted into as a child, is in some way my like potential energy spring stretching event. So who knows? Energy's energy. I feel like Alex Light is the ultra deluxe marine deep cycle boat battery of potential energy.
That's nice of you to say.
I've never met someone who has the need to ground themselves out more. Yeah, you should probably get a massive copper stake and drive it into the ground and chain yourself to it, because you're gonna need that in the future.
Well, that's exactly what my routines are.
Yeah, grounding, right?
The routines and the relationships. Acting to ground the experience and the experiment of basic affirmation, where I'm unwilling to deny any part of my experience, which then requires an awesome amount of creativity to figure out how to integrate very strange aspects of experience. Like if there's an existential bear chasing me, my present philosophy is to proactively ally with it and get it on my side and see what it's doing, see why it's doing it, see what it can do for me. I said I was at a creative impasse where I'm not sure what I want to say right now.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm assuming is in me to be said is the latent rage I have at not like conscious people consciously working for collectivism and communism and consciously trying to push a postmodern nihilism into the equation. But the sheep in people, the willingness to be a little unconscious, just a little bit on purpose. I'm assuming that I have some real statement of anger and rage and disgust to express about people wearing fucking masks as long as they did, and being willing to go along with the insanity that wasn't even inflicted on us. It was the population's willingness to fucking kill itself. Like, just a little bit, though. Just to get around and not step on anyone's toes, I'll kill myself a little bit and censor my own experience of reality. And I, like, the Putin-Ukraine thing, like, it's grotesque and makes me feel, like, disgusted with bureaucrats in general. But I'm much more angry at the everyday people for believing in a narrative of fear and going along with it instead of rising to the occasion.
Well, it's really clear to me that you strongly identify. That fearful person is very much your shadow, and it makes complete sense why you feel such rage towards those kind of people, because those are the kind of people it's the kind of person you desperately don't want to be.
Yeah, and I've been at a maximum point of temptation to follow that fearful voice.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a fierce externalization projection thing.
Yeah, you're raging against the dying of the light.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just never expected this amount of evil to be perpetrated by the human race upon itself. After the fact, I was able to see that the objective evil that was the Iraq War, and go, oh, that was my first confrontation with evil.
Yeah.
And I never expected this COVID thing to happen, which is much more evil, in my opinion. It is a shadow, faint version of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Just watching people all hold hands and bring in this fucking demon demiurge to because they think it's easier than actually living their own lives.
It is easier than living their own lives.
Well, they think it is, and
clearly it was. And because the question is then at that point, what was so hard about living your life that you wanted to do that? And it's because life is fucking confusing as fuck now. So,
sure.
I mean, it's in some sense, I guess, to put a more optimistic spin on this. You know, we've talked about before, but that this kind of COVID thing was maybe something we called up because we needed the kind of generational reset button. That's, you know, there's it's just that idea of you don't know if things were good or bad until you have the benefit of hindsight. I certainly don't have enough of a sample size of having only been alive for 32 years. I don't really know what it's like to be in history. I've only experienced a pretty small slice. So, and like I was saying about World War II, this whole Ukraine thing made me think, wow, World War II was something that was just like this. It was in HD, it was in color, the emotions were just as raw, the relationships of the people who were getting killed were just as real, the dictators were just as dictatory, the sheep were just as sheep, and the soldiers were just as the same as they are now, and it's like, we all had different technology, but different haircuts, you know, different accents, but it's the same story, but we're just playing it out in a super weird context. And there's things that are easier about life now, but there's other things that are harder, and I feel like we have to understand the kind of psychological war zone that we're in. That it's not normal for the humans to take all the cataclysms of the world in their daily Twitter feed every day. That's like the flip side to being hyper conscious of everything, is that we've shifted the burden into our minds. And so this, I think it's pretty rightful to feel a kind of rage against the fear, you know, rage against that light of the dying of that light of consciousness. But it's almost maybe necessary in the long run. I think if it wasn't necessary, it wouldn't be happening. And you said COVID made you stronger. So the rest of the story is yet to be written.
COVID made me stronger, but I would not wish that experience on anyone. To the best of my ability,
right.
I want to protect my children from having that experience. I think they're going to be able to strive and grow and triumph and challenge, even if they never have to deal with the shit I've had to deal with. I would rather that it hadn't happened. And to the best of my ability, I want to prevent that from happening. And yeah, part of my rage is that I wasn't at, and I'm still not at a strong enough personal platform to change the worldwide entropy towards idiocy and stagnancy and disgusting things. So part of my rage is that I wasn't in a better place when everything hit to help it be better. I'm still not at a good place, and so I'm champing at the bit,
Yeah.
I wish I had a bigger platform with which to respond to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I want to respond to the world, but all the recourse I have is to strengthen my platform of health and productivity and creativity.
Yeah, I mean, you're your own world too. You know, there's the world is like as big as you imagine it to be. There's like Elon Musk taking responsibility for the whole human race kind of world, and then there's Alex Light taking responsibility for the human culture kind of world, and then there's like, you know, Joe Schmuck whose parents never even really did anything with their life and were alcoholics, and he's just taking responsibility for his paycheck, and he's not an alcoholic, and
Right.
he's fucking happy because
Right.
good for him, you know what I mean? So it's like the whatever size of thing you bite off, you have to swallow or cough back up.
Right.
And it's, I don't know, it's for me, myself, I guess I have avoided facing that, and the way I insulate myself from that crushing feeling of responsibility is just hoping for the best and going, I'm just going to try this, and then like I'm not going to look back until after I'm there, and then I'm going to see how much effect it had.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like I guess maybe it's blinders. I'm not taking in the vista. I'm not thinking about, I'm like trying to just stay laser fucking focused on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have like this kind of basic faith that like that kind of like just piercingness will get me into the future. And I'll look back and try to, you know, tie things together or something like that. But yeah, I don't know if that's the best option. I suspect it probably isn't the best option because my conscientious side is very underdeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
My ability to discipline myself is very low.
Mm-hmm.
I've leaned my whole life on passion. I've leaned my whole life on never doing anything I really didn't want to do.
Yeah,
And I've gotten through by the hook and by crook and by the skin of my teeth, and I've navigated and through like very pulling up at the last second kind of like goes all the way back to my days as a kid when I would like finish my essay like 30 seconds before it was due and be like, submit, you know, like, and that it's just that kind of attitude toward life has like I've like winged my way through the obstacle course, but I feel like I'm at risk of just being batted down by like something at some point, or being like snapped up by, you know, some
Sure.
little sand dragon thing. I'm like, imagine myself like a little fucking firefly or something, you know, something like that. Like I'm on like a high speed chase kind of thing, life. And just don't look back, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that's one option, but it comes with its own risks. Whereas, you know, if you're going to take this deliberate kind of like stepping into your kingdom kind of view of things, it's like, well, that's a lot to take in. That's a kind of existential vista that's like, fuck, you know? Yeah. Time will tell.
Yeah, is that it?
That's all I got.
Okay. The sun feels really good.